Thank you, Aaron Carruthers, for joining us again this year. Aaron is the Executive Director of California State Council on Developmental Disabilities, appointed in 2015. He is the Chief Officer responsible for carrying out the Council's mission, goals, and policy objectives. He has worked in civil rights policy and programs for over 20 years, including the State Senate, the California's Attorney General Office, and is an appointee of 2 governors. During his tenure at the State Council, he has worked hard to advance self-determination, employment opportunities, school bus safety, and active shooter standards. Last year, the council's work impacted more than 2.5 million Californians, and the State Council was named Employer of the Year for people with disabilities. He is a graduate of the National Leadership Consortium on Developmental Disabilities and was a Choral Fellow in Public Affairs. And we look forward to his important discussion. And then I also want to make sure that we introduce Jeffrey Popkins now, who is with BARC, also the Arc of Bakersfield. He has led incredible transitions out of subminimum wage. He's going to talk with us about the opportunities and challenges in doing so. And so I'm very excited to hand this over to start with Aaron Carruthers to talk about subminimum wage is the past, what's the future. Welcome, Aaron.
Jordan, thank you so much for the introduction. And hello, everybody. It's great to see you again. I'm just thrilled that the public policy conferences the Arc of California holds every year is here. It's back, it's on, it's happening. And I'm always grateful to be able to join everybody. Today's topic, subminimum wage, is the past. What is the future? Is such a fantastic prompt for what I'd like to talk to you about today. Next slide, please. It perfectly sort of frames up an acknowledgement. I think we have to take a moment and just sort of acknowledge where we are in this civil rights movement, because if subminimum wage is the past, what is the future? That means we're in a moment of change. We're also in a moment of creation, and change is hard. Change is hard for lots of reasons. Some people just don't like change or routine. Some people fear losing what they had. Some fear kind of an unknown future. But this is also a moment in our civil rights movement. These moments are what we're here for, and that's to create a vision of the future and a pathway toward it. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that each of our individual paths, each of our individual reasons for being here today at this conference, in this conversation, our individual reasons may be unique, but I know there's something similar, something we all share, and it's very personal. We all have a common love and a shared commitment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, whether that's ourselves or someone else in our lives. So it's from these shared values, the shared commitment, that we're going to create a new future together. So as we pause and acknowledge that we're in a moment of change, if subminimum wages is past, and the question is, what is the future? We have an opportunity to change services. We have an opportunity to make sure that those with the most significant needs aren't left behind. And specifically, we have the opportunity to create what is the next most meaningful day for a person. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some fundamentals, and this may be very, very fundamental. For someone in this conversation, it also may be new for others, and that is, what is subminimum wage? It's when people with developmental and other disabilities are paid less than the minimum wage allows otherwise in law. And this has been legal since the 30s, when the feds passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. It allows employers to obtain a special permit, a certificate, a 14C certificate, to pay certain employees less than the federal minimum wage. It's based on the perceived impact of the employee's disability and what that disability has on their ability to perform. So again, let's keep this in mind of the historical context of the 30s, where we were largely an industrial age society that was focused on an industry of what could we produce. Next slide, please. want to be fair, 14C and subminimum wage was really a forward-thinking idea at the time in the 30s. It was kind of the most enlightened, most progressive, most compassionate people of their time thinking, what can we do to provide job opportunities for World War I veterans with disabilities at a time when other job opportunities, very few for people with disabilities. And but since then, protections have changed, supports have changed, opportunities have changed, but the subminimum wage remains. So some of the protections that have been put into place include the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disability Act of 1990. These laws all help protect people with disabilities from employment and pay discrimination. But there was still that 14C loophole. So times changed, supports changed, that exclusion remained. The supports that have changed are really important to talk about because there's a lot that happened since 14C was created in the 1930s around vocational rehabilitation, around technology and training, of course, job development, job coaching, job supports, and overall inclusive hiring practices. Next slide, please. But in 2020, a report by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights called for the end of 14C programs. Some quotes from that report is that it traps disabled workers in exploitative and discriminatory jobs. Subminimum wage sheltered workshops 14C continues to limit people with disabilities from realizing their full potential. It's counterintuitive. Many people thought it would allow people to have their full potential. Their conclusion was that it limits people from their full potential. 14C and sheltered workshops suffer from wildly insufficient federal oversight and civil rights review. Again, this is taking it from a federal perspective across the country. And people had less than a 5% success rate of transitioning disabled people into competitive fair wage jobs. So this report recognized equal pay for disabled employees is actually a civil rights issue. Next slide. How does this affect California? Well, in 2021, estimates range between 12,000 to 4,000 people in California were working at sheltered workshops and being paid as little as $2 an hour. Next slide. This really brings up question of values and worth. What do we deserve? A person's value, I'm talking about myself, I'm talking about you, I'm talking about the person next to you in this conference. Our value, your value, my value is not determined by whether or not I work. My value as a human is not determined by whether or not I work. There are many ways to be involved in the community, have valued relationships, meaningful lives outside of employment, including education, volunteer work. However, there's an incorrect assumption that's made all the time about the ability of people with disabilities to work. Low expectations and assumptions about what a person can and cannot do based on their disabilities still exist. And that boundary, that barrier is what was getting in the way of people beginning to succeed in employment. Next slide. What do we deserve? People with disabilities, just like anybody without a disability, deserve to be paid at least minimum wage in an integrated setting. Deserve the opportunity to pursue a job related to their own interests, their own skill sets, where they have a choice, where they can thrive and bring value to their employer. Often the solution finds just finding the right fit in the community, providing appropriate training supports, both to the individual and to the employer, and supplying reasonable accommodations to perform the necessary tasks. So those are human core values that are woven throughout the Lanterman Act, but they also come forward in law beginning in 2013. Next slide, please. California is an employment-first state, and want to thank the ARC for its championship of this legislation, along with the State Council, when in 2013, AB 1041 was signed into law, making California the 12th state to state it's an employment-first state. Just reading directly from the law, it's the policy of the state that opportunities for integrated competitive employment shall be given the highest priority for working age individuals with developmental disabilities, regardless of the severity of the disability. This statutorily created a shift that stated, we assume people want to and are able to work first. It's in this context, next slide please, that the State Council, along with Disability Rights California and others, brought forward Senate Bill 639, championed by Senator DeRazzo. It was based on a law passed in Maryland to phase out subminimum wage. Here's the calendar and the timeline for that phase out period. It was passed, it was signed by the governor, it's in effect, and as of January 2022, no new 14C licenses can be issued. A year from then, January 2023, the State Council, we need to produce a multi-year implementation plan to phase out subminimum wage. Then by January 2025, no employee with a disability can be paid less than the legal minimum wage or local minimum wage, whichever is higher. Next slide, please. I want to just point out some of the entities that were supportive of this legislation, the co-sponsors and supporters of the legislation, because what you see here is a broad coalition of disability advocates that goes beyond that to other civil rights advocates and goes beyond that to labor advocates. To accomplish this, the legislature saw this as both a disability issue, a civil rights issue, and a labor rights issue. And that combination together is what really pushed this forward. I want to pause in this moment and thank the ARC of California, thank its leadership, thank its board for the difficult conversations this bill brought up for you about the past and about the future. I want to thank you for the thoughtful conversations that you had, and in the end, being a supporter of this legislation. I know it wasn't easy. I know it brought up hard conversations, and I want to thank you for being there with the State Council and for your leadership. Moving forward, next slide. As I said, what needs to happen now is the State Council, we have to convene a work group. So I want to tell you about that work group and what's going on and how you can be involved. So it requires us to work in collaboration with stakeholders, which includes some named state agencies, to develop a multi-year plan for phasing out subminimum wage. The plan must include these elements, benchmarks and desired outcomes for each year of the plan, a list of resources necessary to ensure employees with disabilities can receive services and supports according to their needs and preferences in integrated settings, regardless of the nature or severity of the disability. It needs to include a roadmap for applying to and using all federal funding programs and grants to assist people with disabilities obtain competitive integrated employment. And it needs to include data collection and reporting requirements for tracking outcomes for those transitioning out of subminimum wage. So that's what the work group's supposed to do. As I said, it's got to include a variety of stakeholders. I want to thank Jordan for being a part of that work group. Thank you. I want to thank Jeffrey, who's on this panel with me, for being part of that work group. Thank you. Next slide, please. I also want to tell you that as at the first meeting of the work group, what I said to them is what I want to share with you. And I just put it here right in quotes, because I gave that work group a charge at its first meeting. What I said is we're not here to re-debate whether subminimum wage or sheltered workshops should continue to exist. The legislature and the governor have made that decision. As Jordan said, and as the title of this section says, subminimum wage is the past, but what's the future? What I said is we're here to consider the voices of people who don't want sheltered workshops to end, to consider the voices of people with high needs who found a fit there and aren't sure what happens next. I told the work group are also here to consider the voices of people who believe that these workshops were exploitative and that a new model needs to emerge. And we're here to consider multiple points of view and ultimately shape our vision of the future. We have to have all sides reflected. The process has to be transparent. It needs to be open. It must be open. It must have opportunities for all to participate. for the work group to be fully informed to shape a vision for the future. So let me tell you what some of those next steps are. Next slide, please. So our goal, the work group's goal, is to make recommendations that focus on best practices and focus on innovations. We're hoping to learn from the best from other states. We're the 12th state to phase out a subminimum wage. So there are others who have done it before, but they're in other states. But there's others in California who've done it before, and that's what Jeffrey's going to talk about. He's a leader. He's a pioneer. He's ahead of the law, and he's here with lessons learned that we can learn from to then share with others. So we're working quickly, the state council, to make these recommendations, to form them, to shape them, and include some that could possibly be in place as quickly as the 22-23 fiscal year, which begins this July. On our website, we post updates about the stakeholder meetings, all the meeting information, the data elements, the resources. I put a link there. I don't have the ability to share the link with everybody who's here participating, but maybe the organizers do. That'd be very helpful. Thank you. Next slide, please. We also engaged in community conversations. So we started with the belief of California's employment first policy that people can and want to work. We also started off with the foundation that we hold an equal value, that people should have choice. And then in the end, what we're doing is helping individuals create a meaningful day. And that's the challenge, isn't it? How do we create a pathway out for each individual out of subminimum wage shelter workshop in a way that allows each individual choice, including real work for real pay? Next slide, please. So we've been holding these community conversations in March and in April. We're about to wrap them up. We've done them over Zoom in English and Spanish, some with some other languages. They've all include ASL and captioning. We've provided them in a variety of areas throughout the state. But we also are open to anybody who just wants to submit comments in writing. So there's an email address that if anybody has thoughts on a path forward of what the future can look like as we move ahead, please email me, email our general email inbox, and we'll include them in the conversation. Next slide, please. As I told you, the group is working quickly. We don't want to let any time pass. And so the group recently came together with a budget ask, $3 million total in immediate needs. Part of that is of the $3 million, 1.3 is to create a pilot, an alternative in competitive integrated employment. We know the ideal. We also know how hard it is to achieve the ideal. This would create a pilot program for how to get to that ideal. Also contains ask for $900,000 to do upskilling for job developers and job coaches. $350,000 for work incentives for coaching. $300,000 for transportation needs assessment. We know one of the biggest barriers to employment is actually getting to that employment. How are the transportation systems that currently exist working well or falling, or where are the gaps that we can identify? And then $150,000 for transition models. What this means is I'm inspired when I see people like me doing things that I want to do. And so how do we make sure that we're telling the stories and showcasing people who have left subminimum wage, who are in careers of their choice and that are doing well, to then help and show others a pathway forward? So that's our current budget ask that was just delivered last week. So I'm giving you immediate up-to-date news. But like I said, the work group is working fast. They identified these as immediate needs. And in the implementation report, there'll be expanded recommendations along with timelines and other funding needs that may be needed, as well as federal dollars to ask for to meet these needs. Last slide is a thank you. So of course, any questions, comments, suggestions, feel free to reach out to me directly. There's my email address. And if subminimum wage is the past, I've laid out for you a process of how we're getting to the future. And I'd love to turn it over to Jeffrey, who's going to tell you how BARC led the way.
Good afternoon. One of the problems that you have when you're the last speaker of the day and everybody's been so excellent is that it really sets a very high bar of what you have to do to be able to finish up the day. So that's what I hope to do. And if you could put up my slides, please. Okay, I want to share with you what the Bakersfield ARC has done over the last 3 years in terms of moving forward with our transition. So this is a policy conference. This is policy implementation, where sometimes, what we say, where the rubber meets the road. Next slide. It started off by us taking a look at our mission. This was our mission in the past, and it was to helping people. And if you could go to the next slide. But now we've come up with a new logo, which is we've branded differently. And now we're providing supports. It's a different sort of view of how you go about providing services. I think that's a critical issue when you start looking at how you want to make the changes. What are you all about? What is your mission? Next slide. So we were founded by a group of parents in 1949 when there were no services. So we predate the ARC. We have grown from the Parent Support Group Cooperative to inclusive vocational day and community services over 72 years. And we're striving towards meaningful community services, focusing on obtaining positive person-centered objectives. Next slide. So some of the strategic changes that are all about, there was a Workforce Initiative Act that was passed in 2014, the Home and Community-Based Act, which was also 2014, the Lanterman Act, Employment First, and then as Aaron was talking about, SB 639. And all of these are what are sort of the foundation of what you need to look at as you're making these changes. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, setting the vision. We have a very experienced management team here, over 125 years of persons working in IDD, which I think really makes a difference. Also, over the last few years, we had a change in executive director, and so it really helps in terms of creating that new mission. One of the things that we found very early on is much of the work needs to be with your middle level managers. They're the ones who are working with your direct support professionals. They're the ones who are out in the field, and they're the ones who are assuring that the quality of the service is occurring. And so we needed to really get them to look at how we provide services differently. So it's no longer about sheltered employment, subminimum wage. It's now about the community imperative. In addition, we got a DDS Medicaid waiver grant, and we've been using that for the last few years. And I didn't put it on the slide, but we've also been involved with the Department of Labor. There's a program called NEON, and the ARC national office is a member of that group. They will be taking new ARCs come next fall. If you're interested, I think it's a really good way to go. Okay, next slide. So we closed our sheltered workshop. We also closed our site-based recycling and our site-based day services. So in doing that, we sold our 25-acre campus. We had a lovely campus that was, every year met all of the CARF requirements, met all the licensing requirements. It was a very good place for people to go. It just wasn't integrated. So the imperative was that we needed to move on. So part of our commitment is we still believe that group employment has a place. So we're committed to phasing out all of our 14C for all of our clients, the subminimum wage, by 12 of 22. And the reason for that is we have contracts right now. And so as our contracts are coming up for renegotiation, we're negotiating them so that everyone on that contracted work site is making minimum wage or above. We also restructured our group employment. When we really looked at it, there were a number of people who have been in the group employment for many years and have not moved. They like the group employment and really they didn't see an incentive to move on to community integrated employment. So we really needed to look at how we structured employment. Okay, next slide. So what we did, we hired a transition coordinator, a full-time position that just looked at how we go about making this transition. We vendored with the Regional Center for Tailored Day Services, which is an alternative to traditional day services, and we're using that primarily as a intro to getting people into services on an individual basis to do job preparation, resume development, employment skills, soft skills, et cetera. So we're really looking at that. We went full bore into paid internship programs. So we're working on trying to get clients into employment, and that's up to a little over 1,000 hours in a fiscal year. We're really looking also at hybrid day and employment services. Some clients are not going to be working full time, either by their choice because of benefits, because of their physical needs, because of other issues. And so we really wanted to respect that. And so if somebody's working 8, 10, 12 hours a week by their choice, what do they do with the rest of the time? And so we really felt that there was a need to develop a hybrid service so that there can be a combination of types of services. We also vendored with the Regional Center to do competitive integrated employment, and there are some incentives for agencies who are doing that at the time you get the client their employment, and then periodically over a period of time you get other incentives for doing that. Next slide. We really looked at how much non-profit volunteer we work, especially for some of the clients who were leaving our traditional day program or our sheltered employment and didn't particularly want to go into competitive integrated employment services. We looked at other employment opportunities for folks that could potentially be available. We created a position called a peer mentor. A peer mentor, that we have a gentleman who through our program, we got him a competitively integrated employed. He came through our tailored day services and then worked into a paid internship and is now competitively employed. And he's come back and he's now working 12 hours a week for us on top of a full-time job, where he's going out and talking to clients directly and telling them what it's about to work in employment. It's one thing for a professional or a job developer or a DSP to be working with a client. It's another thing for a client to be talking to another client about what the services are and how those work and what that means. One of the things that became a major issue for us was informed choice. And what we believe that really, a lot of our clients have had limited opportunities and don't fully know what's available to them. So when you're talking to someone and saying, oh, well, what sort of option would you like here? And they've never been exposed to any of those options. They really don't know what is available. So you really need to go back and start working with people and letting them know what the options are, where they fall into that range, what it means for their benefits, what it means for their day, et cetera. And we redesigned all of our program designs. So for all the programs that we do through Regional Center, they've all been rewritten to be person-centered, and we also did that with our documentation too. So when we do our individual service plans, our yearly documentation, it's all based on the model of person-centered planning. Next slide. Now, I want to talk about challenges for a couple of minutes. Transitioning workers with more serious disabilities from alternative workplaces into mainstream employment settings is probably the biggest challenge that we're facing. For some of the clients who were in our especially sheltered employment, who were making very limited dollars for their work because everything was time studied, it has become a challenge to try to integrate those folks into the workplace. And we're really trying to use the discovery model and informed choice and other resources. One of the things that we've worked with is a software program called Virtual Job Shadow. We're doing a lot of different things to try to find ways of looking at those individuals who are the most difficult. It's fairly easy to take the clients who are most capable and have the highest production rates and move those on. these folks create a much greater challenge in the system. Next slide. One of the other issues you find oftentimes is that we live in a very rule-bound system. There's Lanterman, there's Title 17, there's all kinds of different rules that we live by, and it's not always easy to come up with real innovative strategies. Like, for example, the whole concept of a hybrid day is something that is really needs some refinement to really get off the ground. Staffing, is we've heard throughout this conference, the current situation that we have throughout the nation with finding staff to provide the supports necessary for the people that we serve continues to be a challenge. Transportation is a major issue. One of the things that we found was when we started talking with individuals who were in group employment, who we used to go in the morning and take them to the group work site, do their day, then we take them home at the end of the day, said to us, wait a minute, why do we want to change? We kind of like that. Why do we, what's that? And then benefits is a real challenge too. So as you start looking at getting people into competitive integrated employment, you really need to look at the whole concept of how that's going to affect their public benefit, their health care, et cetera. We're now exploring the possibility of maybe developing a certified benefits counselor as part of our team. There's some of this is available through your local Department of Rehab and through Social Security, and we're looking to see if we can enhance that even further so we can really make sure that we're addressing that, because that oftentimes is an area of resistance for clients or their families. Next slide. So what do we see as a future? All persons with disabilities will live in a setting of their choice, will work next to coworkers who are not disabled, will enjoy rich and varied lives with community members, and will participate in a wide array of integrated community environments. Okay, next. That's it. All right.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us so much. I know that we have a little bit of time if there are questions in the chat. I also want to bring it up to Elizabeth, the co-host for today. And I know, Elizabeth, you've been involved in some of these discussions, and see if you have any comments or questions yourself that you wanted to add.
I wanted to, first of all, I want to thank Aaron Carruthers. I always love hearing you talk. You don't just talk about it, you walk the walk. And I think everybody, big or small, should be able to work and make real money and don't have to worry about their benefits being taken away. Because the longer disabled people live and thrive, the more we can make good living and be self-sufficient. So I challenge everybody who at this conference today, if you want to work, talk to your regional social worker, make a plan, and put that in your IPP, and let your dreams take you anywhere you want to go.
Oh, man.
Because all about today's theme. Go as far as you want to go. Don't make your disability stop you or hold you back.
Elizabeth, that's let your dreams take you as far as you want to go. That's incredible statement, and we kind of ended yesterday on a similar note with Christian. Thank you for that comment on this. There's one question I see for Aaron, mostly for Aaron, I believe, and then we're gonna thank them for their great session.
That's great. Elizabeth, it's amazing to see you. Last time you and I saw each other, it was in person. It was Friday, March 6th, 2020 in San Francisco, which was minutes before everything shut down. So I'm so glad that we got to see each other in that moment, and I'm really looking forward to when we get to see each other again. I miss you too. To the question about who's on the work group, Pam, I put the link to the work group members in the chat. So if you could feel free to share that with everybody, that would answer. Pam's on it. She's got it. She's done. So thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, take a look at that if you're interested. Aaron, Jeffrey, and Elizabeth, thank you for rounding out our day and looking into the future with this incredibly important topic, the civil rights movement. And as we all collectively try to move this forward in our community, making sure that everybody moves into the opportunities that are best for them. Really appreciate you guys being part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Have a great rest of the day. All right, everybody, we went 5 minutes.